map, when one clicks on your state on that map, it will pop you out a list of the groups, what the type of group they are, what location. There are links to the group types that will explain, what is a neo-Confederate group, what is a racist skinhead group, and so on. We also have something new on our website, I think a very important feature called the intelligence files, which essentially are profiles of individuals in this movement, leaders generally, as well as groups.
Mark, other than kind of publishing and exposing these hate group leaders, the people who are leading this anti-government, conspiracy-minded patriot groups, what are other things that the Southern Poverty Law Center is doing?
Well, as I think I kind of alluded to earlier, I think one of the most important things we've been concentrating on is kind of naming and shaming the people in the mainstream who are helping this movement grow. So a very good example of that, to me at least, is the example of Lou Dobbs, the former commentator on CNN, who had a show 5 nights a week. Lou Dobbs, for many years, told tall tales on television and presented them as facts. He said that Mexico was planning to secretly invade the United States. He said Latino immigrants, or suggested Latino immigrants, had brought a plague of leprosy to this country. He said 1/3 of American prison cells were filled with quote-unquote illegal aliens. And on and on. I mean, when he finally got to the point...
If Lou said it, Mark, it must have been true, right?
He also, questioned or seemed to suggest that, indeed, Obama was not a quote-unquote natural-born citizen, and all the rest. And ultimately, we took him on. And as you remember, we called for his firing after the birther business. And what happened ultimately was a lot of civil rights and human rights groups came together, and a lot of individual citizens, and CNN just couldn't hang on to him anymore. And, they had to pay $8 million and get rid of him, and I think that was an important victory because, these groups at the fringes of society do affect our democratic discourse and our democracy generally, but not nearly as much as a guy like Lou Dobbs, who has such a podium from which to kind of spew these falsehoods.
Yeah.
Other things we do, we've mentioned law enforcement trainings. Our lawsuits against hate groups are not only important and effective, but really, as you well know, Richard, what made this place very famous. Our most recent one being against the Imperial Clans of America, based on the really savage beating they gave a boy who they described as a quote-unquote spick. Finally, the final piece of what we do in this world is to approach kids, the very kids we were talking about before, K through 12 kids, through their teachers with our Teaching Tolerance program, which does just what the name implies.
Yeah. Mark, people are interested, of course, in what we're doing to fight hate, but they're also interested in what they can do to fight hate and extremism in their communities. Gregory, Edward, Don, lots and lots of people really want to know what can they do.
Well, I think one of the most important things they can do is the calling out of these mainstream people. As you know, Richard, if the Southern Poverty Law Center criticizes Michelle Bachmann, the congresswoman from Minnesota I mentioned earlier, it really doesn't have a whit of an effect on her. She doesn't care what we say down here in Alabama, but she does care what her constituents in Minnesota say. So individual citizens have a lot of power, I think, to affect politicians and media commentators and so on when they make these kinds of statements. So that is number one. I think, when a person knows of criminal activity or is a victim of criminal activity related to this movement, even if you would rather not do so, it is important to let police and or federal officials like the FBI know. Because there are a lot of officials out there really working on this, and the information is important and helpful to them. I think overall, as members of a democratic society, it is important for people to understand, just to be aware of what's out there. There's a real movement. This is not a fantasy or a nightmare. I mean, it's really happening. It's not the end of our democracy, but it's something serious that's got to be paid attention to. A couple other things I would say. I think it's important when hate groups come to town, when the Klan is going to march in your downtown courthouse square, that the community speaks up in some way against this, but we would suggest very strongly that people not do so in the form of a kind of in-their-face counter-demonstration, because those kind of events almost invariably lead to violence, and vastly more often than not, it is the anti-racist demonstrators who end up getting so riled up that they're the ones who are arrested by police, and it essentially works out to be a victory for the hate group. So I think all of those things are very important.
Yeah, and I would add just that everyone in their own sphere of influence, in their life at work, and in their life at home, and their life in the community, need to speak out against kind of the craziness that they hear. Need to speak out when they hear racist jokes, insensitive jokes. Need to serve as examples for their children, and need to reach across the lines that too often divide us. Whether those lines in a community be defined by race, whether those lines be defined by ethnicity, sexual orientation, or class. I think that it's very, very important for everyone in their local communities to reach out to other persons who share different points of view and who may be coming from different places, because in the end it's we got to stand united, and we can't let kind of the hate mongers divide us. So I would just, if it's okay to add that, Mark.
Yeah, no, well said. And I would just point out one parenthetical to what you've said, which is that when these hate groups do come to town, when a community does decide to try and speak out, many times that is the perfect moment to build the very kind of dialogue you're talking about, Richard. It may be that most of us live in places where everyone doesn't talk openly to one another, where there are real gaps between the black community and the white community, and so on. But these groups coming to town can provide a very good catalyst for starting a discussion that just makes our communities healthier and more democratic.
Yeah. Well, we've been going now for about, my little count here says 39 minutes and 59 seconds. So I think we're gonna call it quits now. I really appreciate everyone who's joined us. Mark, thank you for the great work that you do. For all of our supporters out there, thank you for making our work possible, and for all of you out there, I really appreciate your joining us today. This chat with Mark will be archived on our site later on, and you can listen to it again or send it to friends. Also, as Mark said, we have a new website, and it has incredible information on there. The archives of the reports that Mark has put out, information about the lawsuits that we have filed, and suggestions for what you can do kind of in your community. So again, this is Richard Cohen from the Southern Poverty Law Center saying thanks for being with us, and we look forward to talking with you next time. Bye-bye.